At 79, Gerald McRaney confesses she is the love of his life. At 79, Gerald McRaney has played just about every kind of tough man television could create. But when he talks about the woman who changed his life, none of those characters seem to matter. Because after all the fame, the awards, the marriages, the arguments, and even the years they spent apart, his answer is surprisingly simple. It was always Delta Burke. I find that part of their story more moving than any Hollywood romance that begins perfectly. Because theirs didn't. Gerald McRaney and Delta Burke met more than 4 decades ago, and neither of them could have known just how complicated their story would become. Gerald wasn't even supposed to become an actor. He grew up in Collins, Mississippi, and after a football injury kept him away from sports, he wandered into drama. Then life took him somewhere completely different. He worked in the Louisiana oil fields, spending months as a mudlogger, before returning to acting with a theater company in New Orleans. For years, he lived between 2 worlds. Oil fields on one side, Shakespeare on the other. Eventually, he headed for Los Angeles, and Hollywood didn't exactly welcome him with open arms. He drove a cab to pay the bills and spent years taking small acting jobs. A lot of those early roles were villains, gunfighters, men who lost. Sometimes Gerald would barely make it to the second act before somebody took him out. Honestly, it's almost funny when you know what came later, because the man who would eventually become known for playing strong, dependable characters spent years being the guy television audiences were waiting to see get defeated. One of his early experiences taught him something he never forgot. While working on the Rockford Files, James Garner personally walked to Gerald's dressing room just to introduce himself. Gerald was a relatively unknown guest actor. Garner didn't need anything from him. He simply welcomed him. Years later, when Gerald's parents visited California, Garner made time to sit with them, even though a network executive had wanted him elsewhere. Gerald never forgot that. Maybe because he understood something about kindness that Hollywood can make people forget. How you treat someone when you don't need them says a lot about who you really are. Then came Simon and Simon. In 1981, Gerald became Rick Simon, the street-smart detective who helped turn the CBS series into a major television success. Suddenly, the struggling actor had the career he'd spent years chasing, and then Delta Burke walked onto his set. They had actually met once before. It was at an awards luncheon in the mid-1980s. Gerald remembered being fascinated by her. But nothing happened. Not then. The second meeting was different. Delta was already becoming famous as Suzanne Sugarbaker on Designing Women. She was funny, sharp, beautiful, and carrying a kind of confidence that could fill a room. Gerald later admitted that he thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. This time, he didn't let the opportunity disappear. When filming was finished, he asked her out. Their first date became a second, and on that second date, Gerald McRaney asked Delta Burke to marry him. That sounds almost unbelievable. But somehow, it makes sense when you understand what they saw in each other. Delta was dealing with a tremendous amount of pressure. Her fame had exploded. Her relationship with the people behind Designing Women had become painful. She faced constant public criticism, especially about her appearance. And eventually, her emotional struggles became overwhelming. That period of her life was extremely difficult. What mattered was that Gerald didn't look at Delta and see a problem he needed to fix. He saw Delta. That's what she later said mattered so much. She had spent years feeling judged. Gerald made her feel accepted, completely. And I think that's where their real love story begins. Not at the wedding, not at the first date, right there, with a woman who had become accustomed to being scrutinized, finally meeting someone who wasn't interested in judging her. They married on May 28, 1989, at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles. There were hundreds of guests. They honeymooned through Europe, and for a while everything looked like the perfect Hollywood ending. But real marriages don't end where the wedding does. They continue. And theirs would be tested. They never had children together, although Gerald had children from earlier marriages. They built a life around companionship, work, family, and simply being there for one another. Then came 2012. After 23 years together, Gerald and Delta separated. That news shocked people. But what happened next may tell you more about their relationship than the wedding ever could. They didn't rush toward divorce. They went to therapy, they talked, they worked through what had pulled them apart, and eventually they found their way back. Then, in 2017, they separated again. And still, no divorce. That detail always gets me, because Hollywood tends to treat separation as the end of the story. For Gerald and Delta, it became another chapter. They lived separately but remained deeply connected. Gerald even bought a home less than a mile from Delta. They spoke every day. They watched shows together from separate homes and texted each other while they watched.